story time? I think so. So, I thought maybe I would talk about one of my zillions of ghost stories. They seem to be pretty active around me. I don't know why. So, this particular story happened when I was in Prescott, Arizona. I was working at this hotel, which will remain nameless, but let's just say it was on I-89. I was working at the front desk. One night I was working with one guy, and it was just the two of us. We had a guest come up to the front desk, and he was like, "We need some cigarette trays." And I was all, okay. So I was like, alright, well, you're the dude. You go get them, because they're down in the basement. And so the guy that I was working with was like, no, you can go get them. And I'm like, what, you know? And this is like this 3 to 11 shift, so it's like all dark out. It's like 10:30 at night, and it's just like a little bit before we're like ready to go home. And he's like, no, you've got to go, you got to go. And I'm like, what is your big deal? Why don't you just go? Like, I'll watch the front desk and you go. He's like, no. And he's arguing with me. I'm like, fine, I'll go. So he's like, here, take this walkie-talkie with you. I'm like, why don't you need a walkie-talkie? I'm just going into the basement. Like, okay. He's like, no, just take it with you in case, you know, you can't find him or whatever. And I'm like, all right. The basement was like 3 really long tunnels like this. It was like side by side. And one tunnel that run all the way along the front. So I come out and I'm looking both ways, and I could have swore I heard something, but I was just kind of like, no, you know, it's no big deal. The really creepy part about this is that the halls were all white. The floors, the walls, the ceilings, everything was white. Really, really white. So you feel kind of like you're in one of those mental institutions from movies like Gothika. And then I start walking, and I'm like, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, and I'm walking down, and I'm like, where did he say those things were again? So I'm trying to count which door, because he said it was like the 5th or 6th door down or something, and I'm like, okay, 1 door, 2. Like, if it looked like the basement was supposed to be made into a hotel too, but instead they turned it into storage. So there's like hotel doors, they're all the way down, but everything is white. It's like pitch black in there, there's no lights or anything. And I'm just like, you know, like I can't say anything, which makes me kind of nervous because I'm a little bit afraid of the dark. So I look in and I'm like, oh, I don't see it. And so like I close the door, and then that's when I heard it. I heard like giggling. And I'm like, you know, is someone follow me down here? But the thing is to even get down into the basement, you have to have a key to put into the elevator, which I had, and the guy that I was working with wouldn't have left the front desk. So I was a little concerned. Plus it sounded like a little girl, not like him, like a grown man. And then I started to get a little worried. And I turn around quick and I'm looking in each direction, and there's like nobody. And I'm like, okay, you're hearing things. You're crazy. I start walking more. And I'm trying to look at all these doors. I'm opening, closing. I swear to God, after every single time that I shut a door, I heard hee hee hee, like giggling. And I'm just like, what the hell, you know? So then, like, I start walking, and I'm like, maybe it's, like, all the way down the other hall, and he meant, like, you know, 5 or 6 from that end, or whatever. So I go all the way down there, and I'm looking for these friggin' ashtrays, and as I'm walking, I hear, like, footsteps behind me. So I turn, there's, like, nobody there, and I'm like, oh, what the hell, you know? So then, like, I radio up to the guy that I'm working with. I'm like, hey, did you come down here? Did you send a kid down here for something? And he was like, no. And it's like starting to break up, and I was really fuzzy. But all I got out was, why did you hear something? And I tried to tell him, like, I keep hearing footsteps, but it kept like breaking up on me, and he would be like, what? And I couldn't get through to him. I'm walking along or whatever, and I'm just like, screw this. I'm going back upstairs. Like, I'm sorry, we can't find you an ashtray. I'll go to a different room, steal one out of there, and give it to you. I'm like getting ready to go back upstairs, and I've made it all the way down to the end of this hall. I turn around. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to turn around really quick in case there's somebody there, like they can't dodge into a door or something, and like I'll catch them. So I turn around really quick, and I could have sworn I saw like a little girl standing right in the middle of the hallway. There is nothing more scary than a friggin' little girl, okay? I could have seen a grown-ass hobo would not have scared me as much as this little girl. So anyways, now I'm like blinking and all rubbing my eyes and stuff, trying to figure out, what the heck, you know? So I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to kind of go as fast as I can and get out of the basement. So I'm walking, and again I hear those footsteps, and I'm just like, oh, what the hell? So I'm like, maybe it's just like an echo, you know, like it's an echo in the basement, and my mind's playing games on me. So then I start walking faster, and then I stop, and it would take a minute. It was like, but it would be like different than the steps that I took. You know, you can really tell if they're your steps or not. Like these were lighter, and they were more tapping noise than mine. Mine were like sneakers. So I'm walking, and I go faster, and then I go slower. I go faster, then I go slower, and I stopped. And I was just like, I'm just going to skip. I'm just going to skip. So I start skipping, and what do I hear? Skipping right next to me. But the scariest part about it was I heard skipping and giggling. I'm like running. Skipping and running. Trying to get upstairs, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what just happened? I get in the elevator, I quick shut the door or whatever, and I go up. And I see him, and I'm like, and he's like, what happened? You know, like, I was trying to radio you the whole time we were down there, you weren't answering. I was like, I never heard you. I was like, when I heard you was when I was talking to you, and you kept breaking up anyway, so it didn't even matter. And he was like, did you get the ashtrays? And I was like, friggin' A, no, are you kidding me? Like, why'd you send me down there? He was like, you saw her, didn't you? And I was like, what? Because he didn't tell me anything before I went down there. I was like, what do you mean her? And I'm thinking, like, did I radio him and tell him I saw a little girl? But I didn't. That was after I got done radioing him. And he's just like, no, did you see a little girl? And I'm like, no, why? And he goes, give me your right hand. And I'm like, no. But I was like, I hadn't looked at my hands. I just had like the walkie-talkies and the keys in my hand. And I'm like, okay. So I give him my hand, and he like covers up my hand really quick, and he's like barely touching it, but he's like covering it with this, and he's like, okay, before you look at this, because I know that you haven't noticed, or you'd be freaking out more, I just want you to know, if you have this mark, it means that she likes you. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? You know, like, so like I pull my hand out from underneath him, because I'm like, stop playing with me, you know, and I look, and there is a friggin' bruise around my hand of a little girl's like finger marks, a bruise, like a yellow just made bruise around my hand, like someone was like holding on to me, like, you know, like around my hand. Anyways, it was really scary. The story is that this little girl had like tuberculosis or something, and she died, and she was buried, and there was like an Indian burial ground or something like that underneath the hotel where we built everything. And since like it was first built, they said they hear giggles down there and stuff. So the next day I asked the housekeeping staff, because that's where the laundry room was downstairs, and all of them said, oh yeah, you know, sometimes we'll put away a bunch of towels and we'll come back and they'll all be back in the bin. And I'm like, what? Like they had all kinds of crazy things happen, but there's my first of several ghost stories.